So then we get to E.T. Do we really need to actually talk about this game?
A lot of people are aware that E.T. has some issues and problems, and part of the problem with that was that I really wanted to do a breakthrough game once again.
The funny thing is, E.T. is actually not that bad a game.
No one had ever done a game in less than 5 months, 5 or 6 months, and I had 5 weeks.
Let's just get this out there. Not the worst video game of all time. Not by a long shot. Is it obtuse? Yes. Yes, it is.
And even though I only had 5 weeks, I still wanted to do a real contribution. I wanted to do a step up. I wanted to do a 3D world where it's a cube you actually run around on that you keep in your head, and here we go. And maybe that was too much, you know, maybe I was overly aggressive.
If you actually learn to play E.T. by its own rules, it's not awful, but it was not something that anyone was happy with when they got it as a kid.
It became the game that destroyed the video game industry. So there's a part of me that really is excited about the idea that I was able to single-handedly topple a multi-billion-dollar industry.
You're falling into holes, you're trying to collect these things everywhere, there's some weird random thing chasing you.
The sales of the game were horrible. People were returning this game. They were crying. There's stories of kids honestly crying that when they got this game. That's how bad this game was. It was, to them, unplayable.
I think back then, you really needed to read the instruction manual, and maybe a lot of people didn't want to. They thought everything would be like Space Invaders. You just shoot everything, you try to get a high score. E.T. was a game where you actually had to beat it.
I was presenting the 2600 design, and there was a guy from CoinOp presenting a CoinOp design, because there was going to be a CoinOp E.T. also. And we met with Spielberg and presented our designs, and once I laid this whole design out for him and stuff, and he looked at me and he said, gee, Howard, you know, couldn't you do something like Pac-Man? I had this impulse to say, well, gee, Steven, could you do something like The Day the Earth Stood Still? But I didn't say that, and I have to say that in retrospect, when I look back at that, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad idea to try and knock off Pac-Man in some way, but I couldn't do it. I mean, that's just not who I was.
They did print way too many E.T. cartridges, similar to Pac-Man, and they eventually just kind of had to eat that loss.
One of the most famous legends in the history of gaming, which is apparently true, is that some obscene amount of E.T. cartridges, like 2 million cartridges or something, were buried out in the desert in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
It's another conspiracy.
Now, this is at a time where Atari was taking a nosedive, okay, financially. They were falling apart. And it's expensive to take stuff and ship it out into the middle of the desert and crush it and bury it. That's a lot of money. So it was always my contention. There were 2 reasons why I felt that probably was not true. One is, it doesn't make sense for a company that's financially failing to spend all the additional money it would take to go and physically destroy all of these carts when they could cannibalize them and reuse some of the resources in new carts. And what are you trying to hide them from?
So many gamers have dreamed of digging up some of the E.T. games, and you know, there's stories about they were like steamrolled and they were covered in cement, and I've heard all kinds of different things. I've heard some people say that there's like a parking lot on top of it, or it's underneath a Kmart or something.
It just doesn't make any sense. That's one reason. The other reason was I was kind of connected into the Atari grapevine by and large, and I really believe if this would have been happening, I would have heard about it back then at some point. And if I had, what I would have done was I would have hired like a photographer and flown us out and gone and stood on top of this mound of games and got my picture taken, because what a great thing that would be.
E.T. was probably the first time where the consumer had a mass revolt against a game.
Sure.
And they brought down Atari partially because of that.